My teacher told me to my face I was imagining things after I reported him for what he did to my best friend. When we tried to show proof, he said, "False accusations destroy lives." We left. 3 years later, his arrest made international headlines. I was a sophomore when Riley, the girl who'd been my best friend since elementary school, came back to school after missing 2 months. Everyone said she'd transferred or moved away, but the truth was darker. When she walked into first period that Monday morning, the entire classroom went silent like someone had hit pause on reality. "There's the slut who got knocked up at 15!" Someone yelled from the back row, shattering the silence. The whole class erupted in cruel laughter while our teacher, Mrs. Anderson, just stood there at the board pretending she hadn't heard anything. Riley's face turned bright red, but she held her head up and walked to her seat in the back corner. That day at lunch, Riley sat completely alone at a table in the far corner of the cafeteria, getting wadded-up paper thrown at her from nearby tables. I tried walking over to sit beside her, but my friend group literally grabbed my arm and pulled me back to our table. One of them handed me a crumpled piece of notebook paper. "Don't feel bad for her. She deserves everything she's getting. She baby-trapped that college guy who was tutoring her, and now his whole future is destroyed because of her lies." I wanted to argue, but I stayed quiet like a coward, watching Riley eat alone while trash rained down on her table and nobody did anything to stop it. I watched Riley carefully over the next few weeks and saw how her entire life at school became absolutely unbearable. Teachers who'd once praised her intelligence and kindness now looked at her with barely concealed disgust. They'd answer her questions with dripping sarcasm, treat her like she was contaminating their classroom just by being there. During our health class unit on safe sex and pregnancy prevention, Mr. Foster giving the presentation stared directly at Riley the entire time, making pointed comments about girls who make bad choices and ruin multiple lives. The other students were even worse than the adults. Girls who used to copy her homework now whispered "whore" when she walked past in the hallways. Her entire friend group had exiled her immediately and completely. She had to deactivate all her social media within the first week because of the harassment. But through all of this horrible treatment, I noticed something about Riley that didn't match what everyone was saying. Riley never let the constant bullying turn her bitter or cruel. I saw her still volunteering at the elementary school reading program after classes ended. I saw her quietly slip lunch money to a scared-looking freshman who'd forgotten his wallet. She always had extra tampons and pads in her backpack for any girl who needed them. Nobody ever thanked her for any of it. They just took what they needed and went back to pretending she didn't exist or actively tormenting her. Everything in my life changed completely the day I decided to skip last period to deal with my own problems. My stepdad had gotten drunk again the night before, and I'd had to barricade myself in my room while he raged through the house breaking things. I needed a few minutes alone to stop my hands from shaking and catch my breath. I went to the hidden spot behind the old gym building where there were no security cameras installed. I was sitting on the ground trying not to cry when I heard footsteps approaching. Mr. Harrison, my AP literature teacher, appeared around the corner of the building. Everyone absolutely loved him, especially the girls who giggled at every joke he made. "Rough day?" he asked, moving closer to where I was sitting. I'd been caught skipping and knew I was in trouble, so I just nodded and asked him, "Please not to tell anyone or report me." "I won't tell anyone," he responded quietly. "I've been noticing you seem stressed lately. I could help you feel better if you'd let me." Before I could even process what was happening or what he meant, he had me backed against the brick wall. His hand started sliding down my arm slowly, and I completely froze like a deer in headlights. My backpack fell from my shoulder and hit the ground. "Just let me help you relax," he whispered close to my ear. "Get the hell away from her right now." Riley appeared around the corner holding her phone pointed directly at us with the camera clearly recording. Her hand holding the phone was completely steady, even though her voice shook with obvious rage and fear. Mr. Harrison stumbled backward quickly and immediately tried to play everything off like nothing inappropriate had happened. "I was just checking on a student who seemed upset. You're completely misunderstanding an innocent situation here. This is ridiculous. I recorded everything that just happened. Leave right now or I'm calling the police." The way Riley said those words made him actually listen and back off. He muttered something threatening about reporting both of us for skipping class and disappeared quickly around the building. I stared at Riley with complete shock and gratitude flooding through me. She helped me pick up my backpack and told me she'd come out here for some peace and quiet too. She wasn't trying to be a hero, just happened to be in the right place at exactly the right time. But I knew that wasn't completely true, because she'd deliberately followed me. Riley walked me directly to Principal Matthews' office. She demanded firmly that something be done immediately about Mr. Harrison's completely inappropriate behavior. But Principal Matthews barely even looked up from the paperwork on his desk when we walked in. He seemed annoyed we were interrupting his afternoon. "Mr. Harrison has taught at this school for 12 years without a single complaint against him. Are you absolutely sure you didn't misinterpret what you saw?" Riley's voice got sharper. "He had her pinned against a wall with his hands on her. I have video of the whole thing on my phone." Matthews finally looked up at us, but his expression wasn't concerned. It was dismissive and almost hostile. He turned his attention to me directly. "Is that what happened? Sometimes when we're upset or going through difficult things at home, we perceive situations differently than they actually occurred." Then he looked back at Riley, and his voice took on an even more condescending tone that made my stomach turn. "Given your own situation and recent choices, I'd think you'd understand that making serious accusations without concrete proof can destroy someone's career and reputation. If you didn't want more drama in your life, perhaps you should have thought more carefully about your decisions at 14. Riley's face went completely red, and tears filled her eyes instantly. She turned and walked out of the office without another word. I wanted desperately to defend her and tell Matthews he was wrong, but I was too scared and shocked to speak. I just followed Riley out silently like a coward. I wanted to talk to her right there, but she was already gone, disappeared somewhere into the school. I didn't see Riley at all for the next 3 days and started getting seriously worried. But when she finally came back to school, Something even worse had happened to her. I was sitting in algebra when one of the guys who constantly made cruel jokes about Riley called me over to show me something on his phone. I was reluctant, but he and several others pressured me until I walked over. He opened up our grade's private Instagram gossip account and told me to look while he and his friends laughed. My stomach dropped violently when I saw what they'd posted. There were AI-generated explicit photos with Riley's face photoshopped onto them. Multiple images designed to humiliate and destroy her. I felt physically sick looking at them. Pretty hilarious, right? He said, still laughing and showing the photos to other students around him. They all thought it was the funniest thing they'd ever seen. I just nodded numbly and left the classroom immediately. I'd seen Riley earlier that morning, so I went looking for her desperately. I found her in that same spot behind the gym, sitting on the ground, crying so hard her whole body shook. I didn't say anything at first. I just sat down beside her and put my arm around her shoulders. After what felt like forever of painful sobbing, she turned to me with tears streaming down her face. "You're the only real friend I have left in this entire school." Then she practically collapsed against me, pressing her face against my shoulder. "You deserve to know the actual truth," she said in a broken voice. "That college tutor everyone thinks is the father? He's not. He broke up with me the second he found out I was pregnant. He wanted nothing to do with me after that." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My mind was racing, trying to understand. "Then who is the father?" I asked very hesitantly. "Mr. Harrison," she said before bursting into tears again, her whole body shaking. My heart completely stopped. The same teacher who'd just tried to assault me behind the gym. I held Riley tightly while she cried, and my mind raced through everything trying to make sense of it all. Suddenly, everything made horrible sense. The confidence Mr. Harrison had when he cornered me, how smoothly he'd tried to manipulate the situation. Riley told me it started last year when she was struggling badly in his AP literature class. He'd offered extra tutoring sessions after school to help her grade improve. At first, everything seemed completely normal and appropriate. Then he started making comments about how mature she was for her age, how special and different she was from other students, how much potential she had. She said she should have recognized the warning signs, but she was only 14, and he made her feel important and seen. One day after a tutoring session, he asked her to stay a few extra minutes to discuss her last essay. That's when everything changed and he assaulted her. She never told anyone because who would possibly believe her story? The most beloved teacher in school versus a teenage girl everyone already thought was stuck up and privileged. I asked her why she came back to school at all if everyone treated her so horribly. She wiped her eyes and said she couldn't let him win like that. She had to graduate. She had to show her baby that you don't give up when things get impossibly hard. But now with these fake explicit photos spreading everywhere, she didn't know if she could actually survive it anymore. I told her we absolutely had to do something about this. We couldn't just let Harrison get away with what he'd done to her and tried to do to me. She laughed bitterly and reminded me what happened when we went to Principal Matthews. Nobody in power would listen to us or believe our story. I said maybe not alone, but together we might figure something out. She looked at me like I was completely insane, but I could see a tiny spark of hope flickering in her eyes. We sat there for another half hour just talking honestly. She told me about her parents, how utterly disappointed they were in her, how they kept demanding to know who the father was, but she absolutely couldn't tell them the truth because they'd never believe Harrison would do something like that. Her dad was on the school board and had voted to give Harrison a Teaching Excellence Award last year. Her mom volunteered at every school fundraiser and constantly talked about what an amazing educator Harrison was. Riley said telling them the truth would destroy her entire family. I understood that fear completely. My own mom wouldn't believe me about anything important. The bell rang loudly and we had to go back inside to our classes. Riley asked quietly if I'd sit with her at lunch tomorrow. I said yes immediately without hesitation. She smiled for the first time since I'd found her crying. Just a small smile, but it was real and genuine. We walked back into the school building together, and I could feel literally everyone staring at us. Someone made a loud comment about me being the next girl to get knocked up if I kept hanging around Riley. I ignored them completely. Riley held her head high with dignity like she always somehow managed to do. I wondered how she found that kind of strength when everything in her life was falling apart. That night, I absolutely could not sleep at all. I kept thinking about Harrison, about how many other girls he might have hurt over his 12 years teaching here, about how he was still in classrooms every day with access to vulnerable students, while Riley got treated like garbage for being his victim. I grabbed my laptop and started searching online desperately for anything that might help us. I found the school's official website and Harrison's faculty bio page. Teacher of the Year twice, advised the Creative Writing Club, volunteer mentor for struggling students, glowing testimonials from grateful parents. It made me feel physically sick reading it. Everything about him looked absolutely perfect on paper and in official records. No wonder nobody would believe what Riley told them. I kept digging deeper, checking old online yearbooks, looking for any pattern or sign that someone else had noticed something wrong about him. But there was absolutely nothing I could find. Just smiling photos of Harrison surrounded by adoring students and beaming grateful parents praising his dedication. The perfect teacher hiding in plain sight. The next morning, I met Riley at her locker before first period started. She looked completely exhausted with dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't hide. I told her I'd been up all night thinking and we needed to be extremely smart and careful about this. She nodded and said she'd been thinking too, barely sleeping between her baby's constant feedings and the anxiety eating her alive. We couldn't go through official school channels anymore since nobody there would listen to us or take us seriously. We had to find another way to expose what Harrison had done. I suggested quietly that we start trying to figure out if Harrison had done this to anyone else before Riley. Her face went dark and she said she'd been wondering the exact same thing for months. We decided to split up and carefully ask around without being too obvious or direct. Just casual conversations to see if anyone else had weird or uncomfortable experiences with Harrison. Riley would talk to girls in her grade who'd had him for literature classes. I'd check with sophomores who currently had him. We agreed to meet at lunch and compare what we'd learned. The morning dragged by painfully slowly. In English, I sat next to Sarah, who had Harrison for fourth period. I casually asked how her literature class was going, trying to keep my voice light and normal. She shrugged and said it was fine, nothing special. I pushed just a little bit more, asking if Harrison was as amazing as everyone always said he was. She got this really weird look on her face for just a second before her expression went completely blank. Yeah, he's helpful if you need extra assistance, I guess. Then she turned away from me completely and didn't speak to me for the rest of class, suddenly very focused on taking notes. Her reaction told me something had definitely happened, even if she wouldn't talk about it. By lunch period, I'd carefully talked to 8 different girls in my conversations. 4 of them gave me that same weird, uncomfortable look Sarah had when I mentioned Harrison's name in tutoring. Their faces would close off the moment I brought up his after-school help sessions. One girl actually started to say something important, then stopped herself mid-sentence and said, "Never mind," before walking away quickly. Riley was already sitting at our table in the far corner of the cafeteria by the broken vending machine that hummed constantly. Nobody else ever sat there anyway because of the noise. She looked frustrated and upset, picking at her sandwich without actually eating any of it. She'd gotten very similar responses from the girls she'd talked to that morning. Girls would start to open up and say something, then suddenly change their minds and shut down completely. One junior named Emma had actually started crying when Riley casually mentioned Harrison's tutoring sessions. But when Riley asked if she was okay, and if something had happened, Emma practically ran away, leaving her lunch tray abandoned on the table. We both knew we were definitely onto something real and serious, but nobody would actually talk to us about it openly. I remembered something from a true crime podcast I'd listened to obsessively last summer. Predators almost never have just one victim. They have clear patterns, specific types of victims they target, methods they use repeatedly that work for them. Harrison clearly liked vulnerable girls who were struggling academically, girls who desperately needed help and would be grateful for attention, girls whose families trusted him completely, girls who wouldn't be believed if they tried to tell anyone what he'd done. Riley fit that profile perfectly. Pretty and popular on the outside, but secretly struggling with a difficult class and family pressure. I started wondering how many other girls fit that exact same profile over the years. How many had sat in his classroom feeling trapped and scared? After school ended, Riley had to go pick up her baby from her grandmother's house where he stayed during school hours. It was one of the only family members who hadn't completely abandoned or judged her. I offered to come with her for support, but she said her grandmother already thought I was a bad influence somehow. That hanging out with a teen mom would ruin my future too, and I should distance myself. Instead of going with Riley, I went to the public library downtown and pulled yearbooks from the last 8 years that I could access online and in their archives. The librarian gave me a strange, suspicious look, but didn't ask any questions about what I was researching. I started making a detailed list of every girl who'd been in Harrison's literature classes over those years. Then I cross-referenced those names with honor roll lists, looking specifically for students who'd suddenly and dramatically improved their grades in just his class. It was extremely tedious work that took hours, but I definitely found a clear pattern emerging. Every single year, there were 3 or 4 girls who went from C's or D's to solid A's, specifically in Harrison's class. Their grades in other subjects stayed exactly the same or even dropped slightly. Just their literature grade shot up dramatically and suspiciously. I took careful photos of every relevant yearbook page with my phone, making absolutely sure to get clear shots of the names and their grade progressions over time. This was evidence. We desperately needed solid evidence that couldn't be dismissed. That night, Riley texted me around midnight. Her baby had been crying for hours and she was completely exhausted, but she'd thought of something potentially important. Harrison kept an old-fashioned paper gradebook in his desk drawer, separate from the digital system the school used. She'd seen it several times during their tutoring sessions. He made handwritten notes in it, not just grades, but actual comments about individual students. She specifically remembered seeing her own name with stars drawn next to it in red ink. At the time, back then, she'd thought it meant he thought she was special and talented, that she was finally good at something academic. Now looking back, she wondered what those red stars actually meant, what they were really marking. The next day at school felt even harder and more tense than usual. The AI-generated explicit photos of Riley were still circulating everywhere despite administration's supposed zero-tolerance policy. Someone had printed them out in color and taped them inside Riley's locker. She tore them down without saying a word, but I saw her hands shaking violently, and the way she blinked rapidly trying not to cry. In the hallway between classes, a group of senior guys made absolutely disgusting comments as we walked past them. One of them, Kyle, who thought he was God's gift to everyone, actually reached out like he was going to grab Riley inappropriately. I stepped directly between them and told him to back off immediately. He laughed in my face and said I must be protective of my girlfriend now. His friends thought that was absolutely hilarious, and their laughter echoed off the lockers. Riley pulled me away before I could say anything back. She said it wasn't worth getting in trouble over. They weren't worth any of our energy. Then Mr. Harrison walked past us while we were at Riley's locker. He deliberately slowed down and looked directly at both of us. Not at Riley specifically, at me. His expression was friendly and concerned, the perfect caring teacher mask. He asked if everything was all right with us, his voice gentle and almost paternal. I felt my skin absolutely crawl but forced myself to nod. He said if I ever needed to talk about anything at all, his classroom door was always open to me. Then he walked away casually like nothing had happened, his shoes clicking on the linoleum floor. Riley's face had gone completely pale. She whispered that was exactly how everything started with her. The concern, the open door, the offering to help and be there. At lunch, we made our plan. We absolutely needed to get into Harrison's classroom somehow and find that paper gradebook he kept. Riley said she'd helped with English department inventory last summer and still technically had access through the main department office. Nobody had bothered changing any locks, and she'd noticed teachers kept spare classroom keys in the supply closet. We'd go after school when Harrison had debate club. He was the faculty advisor, and meetings always ran from 3:30 until at least 5 o'clock. That would give us enough time to search his room thoroughly. It was extremely risky and we could get caught, but we didn't have any other options available. Nobody would talk to us openly. Administration wouldn't listen. We had to find proof ourselves. The rest of the day crawled by at an absolutely agonizing pace. In my AP literature class, I watched Harrison teach like absolutely nothing was wrong. He made jokes about metaphors and symbolism that students laughed at. Girls smiled at him adoringly. He called on me once to answer a question, and I managed to respond without my voice shaking or breaking. He said, "Excellent analysis," and moved on to the next student. I wondered how he did it so easily. How he could hurt Riley, try to hurt me, probably hurt numerous others, and still stand up there every day like the perfect beloved teacher everyone thought he was. When the final bell finally rang, I met Riley by the gym. We watched Harrison head toward the debate club meeting, laughing with some students about their upcoming tournament. Coast was clear. Riley led me quickly to the English department office. The door was unlocked like she'd said. Teachers were constantly in and out all afternoon. She went straight to the supply closet and found the keyring with all the classroom spares hanging on a hook. Harrison's room number 218 was clearly labeled on a small tag. My hands were sweating badly as we walked down the empty hallway. Harrison's classroom was at the very end, past the other English rooms and the small office where peer tutoring happened. The key worked perfectly in the lock. Inside, the room looked completely normal. Inspirational quotes about literature and writing on the walls. Student work displayed on bulletin boards. His desk neat and organized with a coffee mug that said "World's Best Teacher," sitting next to a stack of essays. We started searching quickly but carefully. Riley took the desk drawers while I checked the tall filing cabinet in the corner. Nothing useful in the first drawer. The second drawer had old tests and quizzes. Third had attendance sheets going back years. The bottom drawer was locked with a small padlock. Riley found a letter opener in the top desk drawer, and we managed to pry the lock open after several tries. Inside were 4 paper gradebooks, current year and 3 previous years. Riley grabbed them carefully, and we started flipping through the pages quickly. At first, everything looked completely normal. Grades, assignment names, standard teacher record keeping. Then Riley found the pages with red stars next to certain names. 6 girls in the current gradebook had stars by their names in red ink. 4 were juniors, 2 were sophomores. All of them showed dramatic grade improvement in the second semester according to the recorded scores. The previous years showed exactly the same disturbing pattern. Stars by certain names, always girls, always students who'd struggled initially then suddenly improved dramatically. Riley recognized several names from her grade. Emma was there with 3 stars next to her name. So was a girl named Olivia who'd graduated last year. Another girl named Jessica who'd transferred to a different school junior year. I took photos of absolutely every page that had stars, making sure the names and all the markings were clearly visible in the images. We had to move extremely fast. Debate club could end earlier than expected. As we were carefully putting the gradebooks back in the exact order we'd found them, a folded piece of paper fell out from between pages. Riley grabbed it quickly. It was a handwritten note on the kind of stationery teenage girls use, with flowers in the corner. The handwriting looked young and careful. "Mr. H, thank you for yesterday. I won't tell anyone like you said. Please don't fail me in your class." No signature at the bottom, but the paper looked old and worn like he'd kept it and looked at it many times. Riley's face went completely white. She whispered that she'd written something almost identical. He'd made her write it after one of their sessions. He'd said it was to show she appreciated his help and mentoring. Now she realized it was actually insurance for him, making it look like she was pursuing him instead of the other way around, making her complicit. We suddenly heard footsteps in the hallway getting closer. My heart completely stopped. We frantically shoved everything back in the drawer and clicked the broken lock closed, hoping it would hold. The footsteps got closer, steady and deliberate. Riley grabbed my hand and pulled me behind the door just as it started opening. Principal Matthews walked into the classroom. He looked around the empty room slowly, then went directly to Harrison's desk. He opened the top drawer like he knew exactly what he was looking for and pulled out a folder. He flipped through papers inside it carefully, studying something, then put everything back and left the room. We waited 5 full minutes after his footsteps faded before we even dared to move. I was barely breathing. My legs were shaking so badly I could barely walk straight. Riley looked ready to throw up. We slipped out of the classroom and locked the door carefully behind us, making sure everything looked undisturbed. Outside, we sat on the bleachers behind the gym trying to process what we'd just witnessed. Matthews checking Harrison's desk personally, the stars marking victims in the gradebook, the note proving the pattern, everything going back years and years. Riley said we absolutely had to tell someone about all of this. But who could we possibly trust? Principal Matthews was clearly involved somehow, or at least knew something. The school board? Would they believe 2 teenage girls with phone photos? What about the police? Would they take us seriously? I said we needed more evidence before going to anyone. We needed at least one of those other girls whose names were in that gradebook to speak up and back Riley's story. She agreed but said none of them would talk. They were all too scared just like she'd been scared, just like she still was terrified. That night, I couldn't eat dinner at all. My stepdad was passed out drunk anyway, so he didn't notice. I kept thinking about those names in the gradebook, those red stars marking victims. How many girls had Harrison hurt over 12 years of teaching? How long had this pattern been going on? I looked up some of the names on social media platforms. Emma had all her profiles completely locked down tight. Olivia seemed to have disappeared entirely from social media after graduation. Jessica's last posts were from almost 2 years ago, right before she transferred schools. None of them seemed active online anymore, just like Riley had been forced to delete everything. Pattern after pattern after pattern. The next morning, Riley texted that she was staying home from school. Her baby had a high fever and she couldn't leave him with her grandmother. I said I'd keep digging and investigating on my own. At school, I felt completely exposed and vulnerable without Riley there. Like Harrison would somehow know what we'd done in his classroom yesterday, but he acted totally normal in class. Taught his lesson about themes in The Great Gatsby, made his usual jokes about the symbolism of the green light. I watched him much more carefully now, though. Noticed how he always picked certain girls to help with demonstrations. Quiet ones who sat alone, ones who looked tired or stressed or sad. He definitely had a type he targeted. Riley had been an exception to his usual pattern. Popular and confident on the outside, but vulnerable in her own way because she was struggling in his class, and her family expected absolute perfection from her. At lunch, I sat alone at Riley's usual table in the corner. Across the crowded cafeteria, I spotted Emma sitting with a few other quiet girls at a small table. I'd seen her name with 3 red stars in that gradebook. She looked tired and thin, like she wasn't eating nearly enough. I walked over nervously and asked if I could sit down. The other girls looked confused, but Emma nodded slightly and moved her bag. I made small talk for a few minutes about upcoming exams and homework assignments we had due. Then very carefully, I mentioned I was really struggling in Harrison's AP Lit class. Emma's fork stopped halfway to her mouth and stayed there frozen. I said I was actually thinking about asking for those after-school tutoring sessions everyone talks about, but I wasn't completely sure if I should. Emma put her fork down slowly and said very quietly that I should definitely find a different tutor instead. Maybe a student tutor from the Honor Society or try online help videos. Literally anything except staying after school alone with Harrison. The other girls at the table looked extremely uncomfortable. One of them changed the subject very quickly to the upcoming winter formal dance. But Emma kept looking directly at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. After lunch ended, she caught up with me in the crowded hallway. She asked in a whisper why I was really asking about Harrison's tutoring. I took a huge risk and told her the truth about Riley, about what Harrison had actually done to her that resulted in her pregnancy. Emma's eyes immediately filled with tears. She said she couldn't talk about any of it. She'd worked so incredibly hard to forget and move on. Her parents had thought she was being overdramatic when she'd tried to tell them something felt wrong. They'd said Harrison was a good man who helped her grades improve so dramatically. Why was she being so ungrateful for his help and time? She'd ended up transferring to online school for her senior year just to completely get away from him. But the memories and trauma didn't go away just because she'd changed schools. I asked if she would possibly be willing to help Riley now by speaking up so people would finally believe what happened. Emma shook her head firmly. She said she absolutely couldn't go through all of that again. The invasive questions, the doubt from everyone, the way people would look at her and judge her. She'd seen exactly what they'd done to Riley. The cruel AI photos, the constant rumors and harassment. She couldn't handle any of that. She was applying to colleges and needed recommendation letters. She couldn't have this kind of scandal follow her into her future. I understood her fear but felt frustrated. How many more girls would stay silent while Harrison kept teaching and targeting new victims? Emma must have seen the frustration on my face because she said she was really sorry. Then she walked away quickly before I could say anything else. That afternoon, during my free study period in the library, I was researching whether we could report everything anonymously to someone outside the school system when a girl named Brittany sat down directly across from me at my table. She was in my English class, always quiet with good grades, kept completely to herself. She asked what I was working on so intently. I said just research for a history project. She nodded slowly, then slid a folded piece of paper across the table toward me. She said Emma had told her I was asking questions about Harrison. Then she got up and left immediately before I could respond or ask any questions. I unfolded the paper carefully. It was a screenshot of text messages. Harrison's phone number clearly visible, asking a student to meet him after school for extra help with her essay. Then the messages got increasingly weird and inappropriate, asking if she'd told anyone about their private sessions, saying she was special and different from other students, that he could help her with much more than just literature if she'd let him. My hands actually shook as I read through the messages. This was real proof, actual concrete evidence we could use. I immediately texted Riley even though I knew she was dealing with her sick baby. She called me back within 2 minutes from her grandmother's house. I told her about Emma's reaction, about Brittany, about the screenshots of Harrison's inappropriate messages. She started crying, but they weren't sad tears anymore. They were relieved tears. She wasn't crazy or imagining things. She wasn't alone in this. Other girls had been through the exact same thing. We agreed to meet tomorrow to carefully figure out our next steps. We had real evidence now. We had to be extremely smart and strategic about how we used it. Harrison had been doing this successfully for over a decade. He was careful and protected by the system. We had to be even more careful than he was. That night, I made multiple copies of absolutely everything we had. The photos from the gradebooks, Brittany's screenshot, everything. I emailed them to myself, to Riley, saved them on 2 different flash drives. If something happened to our phones, we'd still have all the proof backed up. I barely slept that night. Kept thinking about Harrison teaching class tomorrow, acting completely normal, maybe already grooming someone new to be his next victim. The thought made me physically sick to my stomach. We had to find a way to stop him before he hurt anyone else. But we were just kids, and he was a beloved teacher with 12 years of reputation. Who would actually listen to us? The next day, Riley was back at school. Her baby was feeling better, and her grandmother could watch him again. She looked absolutely exhausted, but there was determination in her eyes I hadn't seen before. We met before first period started to make our plan. We decided to try one more time with school administration. This time we'd bring all the evidence. The photos, the messages, the pattern we'd documented. If Principal Matthews still wouldn't listen or take us seriously, we'd go directly to the superintendent. If the superintendent wouldn't listen either, we'd go to the school board meeting. Someone in authority had to care that a teacher was deliberately preying on vulnerable students. Someone had to finally stop him and protect us. We walked into the main office together. The secretary asked if we had an appointment scheduled. We said it was extremely urgent. She rolled her eyes but picked up the phone to call Matthews. He came out looking distinctly annoyed, like we were wasting his time. He said he had maybe 5 minutes before an important meeting with parents. We followed him silently to his office. Riley spoke first. She said calmly that we had concrete evidence that Mr. Harrison was behaving inappropriately with multiple students over many years. Matthews sighed heavily heavily like he'd heard this all before. He said we'd already been through this exact conversation. That's when I pulled out the printed photos of the gradebook pages with the red stars, the clear pattern of grade improvements, everything documented. Matthews barely even glanced at them. He said dramatic grade improvement wasn't evidence of anything inappropriate except effective teaching methods. Then I showed him Brittany's screenshot of the text messages. His expression changed slightly. He studied it more carefully, asked where we'd gotten it. I said another student who Harrison had targeted gave it to us, that she was someone else he'd victimized. Matthews put the paper down on his desk and looked at us with an unreadable expression. He said this was an extremely serious accusation we were making. If we were wrong about this, we could completely ruin an innocent man's entire career and reputation. Did we fully understand the weight of that responsibility? Riley's voice got stronger. She said Harrison had already ruined her entire life. She was 16 years old with a baby because a teacher she trusted had taken advantage of her when she was 14. How was protecting his career possibly more important than that reality? Matthews said he would look into our concerns, that we should go to class immediately and let him handle this situation appropriately through proper channels. Something about his tone felt wrong, though. Too calm, too dismissive, exactly like last time. We left his office feeling completely defeated again. Riley said he obviously wasn't going to do anything real. He'd probably just warn Harrison that we were making more accusations, and then everything would get even worse for us. I had to agree with her assessment. We needed a completely different plan. As we walked toward our classes, someone called Riley's name. We both turned to see Mrs. Chen, the AP biology teacher. She asked if we could please talk after school today. She said it was really important. We agreed, completely confused. Mrs. Chen had never paid any attention to either of us before. She taught mostly seniors, and we didn't have her for any classes. The school day passed slowly. Harrison seemed noticeably different in AP Lit class, distracted and on edge. He kept checking his phone under his desk, fumbled over analysis he usually explained smoothly and perfectly. At one point, he stared directly at me for way too long, like he was trying to figure something out about me. I kept my expression completely neutral, but my heart was racing hard. Did Matthews tell him about our meeting this morning? Did he somehow know we'd been in his classroom going through his things? After class ended, he asked me to stay behind to discuss something. My blood went ice cold. I said I had to get to my next class immediately. He said it would only take a minute, and we really needed to discuss my recent grades and performance. Other students were filing out of the classroom. Soon we would be completely alone. I grabbed my stuff and headed directly for the door. He called my name again, and his voice took on a much sharper edge than before. He said we really needed to have a serious talk about my grade and my potential in his class, about specific ways he could help me succeed and improve. The words sounded innocent enough, but the tone absolutely wasn't. I practically ran out of that classroom. In the hallway, I immediately texted Riley. Harrison was definitely onto us somehow. We had to be extremely careful. She texted back that she'd gotten a really weird vibe from him in the hallway too, like he was watching both of us now. We agreed to stick together for the rest of the day for safety. After school, we met Mrs. Chen in her empty classroom. She closed the door carefully and pulled down all the window blinds. That made me nervous, but Riley seemed to trust her instinctively. Mrs. Chen sat on the edge of her desk and looked at us both for a long, serious moment. Then she asked directly if we were the ones asking questions about Harrison and his behavior. We exchanged quick glances, but both nodded. She said she'd heard from Emma and Brittany that we were trying to do something about him. That's why she wanted to help us. Riley asked her why she cared about this. Mrs. Chen said she'd been noticing disturbing patterns for years now. Girls who suddenly dropped out of extracurricular activities they'd loved. Girls who changed from outgoing and confident to withdrawn and quiet. Girls who improved drastically, but only in Harrison's class specifically. She'd tried talking to Principal Matthews about her concerns almost 3 years ago. He'd shut her down immediately and completely. Told her she was seeing problems where none existed. Actually threatened her job if she kept spreading unfounded rumors about a valued colleague. So she'd stayed quiet and just kept watching and noticing more victims. I asked if she had any actual proof or evidence of anything. She shook her head sadly. Just years of observations and growing suspicions, but she said she knew other teachers had noticed concerning things too. Mr. Rodriguez in the Spanish department, Miss Park who taught history. They'd all tried speaking up at different times over the years. All had been shut down hard by administration. Harrison was completely untouchable. He brought in awards and recognition for the school. Parents absolutely loved him. The school board thought he walked on water. Mrs. Chen said the only realistic way to actually stop him was to go completely outside the school system, to bypass administration entirely. Riley asked her what she meant exactly. Mrs. Chen pulled out a business card from her desk. It was for Detective Sarah Mills at the local police department. Mrs. Chen said Detective Mills specialized in crimes against minors. She would take us seriously and actually investigate, but we needed to be fully prepared for what would happen. Once we talked to police, everything would change dramatically. The school would circle their wagons to protect themselves. People would take sides. It would get extremely ugly. Were we really ready for all of that? I looked at Riley. She was holding the business card like it might actually burn her fingers. I knew she was thinking about her baby, her parents, about how much worse things could potentially get than they already were. But then she straightened her shoulders and said yes firmly. She was completely ready. She couldn't let Harrison hurt anyone else. Mrs. Chen said she'd call Detective Mills right away to set up a meeting. She told us to gather absolutely all our evidence, make multiple copies of everything, and be extremely careful. Harrison had powerful friends in high places throughout the community. The next 2 days were incredibly tense. Harrison watched us constantly in class, in the hallways, even at lunch from across the cafeteria. I'd catch him staring and it made my skin crawl. Other students started noticing too. Someone made a joke about Harrison having a thing for the teen mom and her weird friend. People laughed, but it made the situation feel even more dangerous. Riley started having someone walk her to her car after school every day. Usually me or one of the very few girls who still acknowledged her existence. Detective Mills agreed to meet us that Saturday at the police station downtown. Mrs. Chen came with us for support and as an adult witness. The station was smaller than I'd expected, just a regular building. Detective Mills was younger than I'd imagined too, maybe early 30s, with kind eyes and a firm handshake. She took us to a private interview room and said we could tell her absolutely everything. No judgment, no rush, just the complete truth. Riley went first. She told the entire story from the beginning. The tutoring sessions, the compliments about her maturity, how Harrison made her feel special and seen, then how things escalated, how he started touching her shoulders, her hands inappropriately, how he'd keep her after sessions were supposed to end, how one day he kissed her and she completely froze, how it got worse from there, how when she got pregnant, he convinced her to blame someone else entirely. He'd said no one would ever believe her anyway. A respected, beloved teacher versus a popular teenage girl. She just looked like she was trying to cover up her own mistakes. Detective Mills took detailed notes without interrupting once. When Riley finished, I showed Detective Mills all our evidence. The photos of the grade books with red stars, Brittany's screenshot, the pattern going back years that we'd documented carefully. Detective Mills studied everything thoroughly. She asked specific questions about dates, times, particular incidents we could remember clearly. She was professional but gentle throughout. When we finished presenting everything, she said she believed us completely. But believing us wasn't enough legally. She needed more concrete evidence to build a prosecutable case. She asked if we could get other victims to come forward officially. I told her about Emma, about all the other girls who were too scared to talk. Detective Mills said she understood their fear completely, but their testimony would make the case much stronger and harder to dismiss. She gave us her direct phone number and said to call immediately if we remembered anything else or if anything new happened. She also said to be very careful. If Harrison suspected police involvement, he might try to destroy evidence or intimidate potential witnesses. We left the police station feeling both hopeful and absolutely terrified. Someone with actual authority finally believed us. But now it was completely real. There would be an official investigation, invasive questions, maybe eventually a trial. Riley's parents would find out the whole truth. The entire school would know everything. In Mrs. Chen's car, she said we were incredibly brave, that she was proud of us. But I didn't feel brave at all. I felt like I was going to throw up. Monday at school was extremely strange. Harrison wasn't there. A substitute teacher taught AP Literature. Rumors flew immediately and wildly. Someone said he was sick with the flu. Someone else said he was at a teaching conference. But Riley and I knew better. The investigation had officially started. At lunch, Principal Matthews called us both to his office. He looked absolutely furious. He asked if we'd gone to the police behind his back, said we should have come to him first, let him handle everything internally through proper school channels. Riley actually laughed in his face. She said we tried that already and he did absolutely nothing. Matthews said we didn't understand the massive damage we were causing, that Harrison was a good man and a great teacher, that these accusations would completely ruin him even if they weren't true. Did we really want that on our conscience? I found my voice and said, what about the girls he hurt? What about their lives and their damage and their trauma? Matthews said that was alleged and unproven. We were destroying a man's career based on rumors and misunderstandings. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. He said we should be very careful, that making false accusations had serious consequences, legal consequences that could follow us for years. Riley stood up and said we were done with this meeting. We had nothing else to say to him without a lawyer present. Matthews's face went completely red, but he let us leave. In the hallway, Riley was shaking. She said Matthews had just blatantly threatened us. I agreed. We immediately texted Detective Mills about the meeting and what Matthews had said. She responded quickly saying to document everything carefully. Write down exactly what was said. Save any emails or messages. Build a detailed paper trail of everything. The rest of that week was absolute chaos. Harrison didn't come back to school. The substitute became permanent. Rumors went completely wild. Someone said Harrison had been arrested. Someone else claimed he'd fled the state. The truth was less dramatic but still significant. Detective Mills told us he was on administrative leave pending investigation. But the damage to his reputation had definitely started. Parents were asking difficult questions. The school board was getting involved. Then the backlash hit us hard. Harrison's supporters came out swinging. A group of parents started an online petition saying he was being railroaded by vindictive students. They called Riley and me liars looking for attention. The AI photos of Riley resurfaced with new cruel captions about her trying to destroy a good man because he'd rejected her advances. It was absolutely brutal. Riley missed 3 full days of school. I started eating lunch in the library to avoid the cafeteria. But then something unexpected happened. Brittany came forward officially. She walked into the police station with her parents and gave a full detailed statement about Harrison's inappropriate messages and behavior. Her parents had finally found all the texts and believed her story completely. Then Emma's parents called Detective Mills. They said their daughter had something important to say. One by one, girls started speaking up. Not publicly at school, not on social media, but to the police and investigators. Mrs. Chen kept us carefully updated. She said more teachers were coming forward too. Not with direct evidence, but with years of observations and concerns they'd raised that were completely dismissed. Mr. Rodriguez had documentation going back 4 years of his concerns about Harrison's behavior with female students. Miss Park had saved emails where Matthews told her to mind her own business when she'd raised red flags. The investigation expanded significantly. It wasn't just about Harrison anymore. It was about an entire system that had deliberately protected him, that had silenced legitimate concerns, that had prioritized reputation over student safety. Detective Mills interviewed dozens of people. Current students, former students, teachers, administrators. The stories were depressingly similar. Girls who were struggling academically, Harrison offering help, boundaries that slowly eroded, a school system that consistently looked the other way. The investigation took months, not weeks. There were depositions, evidence reviews, complicated legal procedures that seemed to drag on forever. Harrison remained on leave while lawyers battled over every single detail. The community stayed bitterly divided, some calling for his immediate termination, others insisting passionately on his innocence. Riley and I continued going to school, facing daily judgment from both sides. Some days were significantly harder than others. The AI photos kept resurfacing despite multiple takedown attempts. New rumors spread weekly, but we had each other now. And slowly, carefully, we had others too. Girls who'd been silent for years started nodding at us in hallways. Some even whispered thank you when absolutely no one was looking. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Harrison was arrested. The charges were extremely serious. Multiple counts of sexual misconduct with minors. The evidence was overwhelming. Not just our testimony, but physical evidence they'd found when they'd searched his home with a warrant. Photos on his computer of former students. Trophies he'd kept from victims over the years. The grade books with red stars weren't just tracking grades. They were tracking conquests. The community absolutely exploded. Parents who'd defended him were shocked and horrified. Others said they'd always felt something was off but hadn't wanted to believe it. The school held emergency meetings. They brought in trauma counselors. They promised full cooperation with the investigation. Matthews announced his sudden early retirement, said he wanted to spend more time with family. Everyone knew the real truth, though. He was getting out before they could officially fire him and investigate his role. But something actually good came from all this horror. The students who'd tortured Riley started backing off significantly. Some even apologized. Not many, but a few actually seemed genuine. The AI photos finally disappeared completely. Kyle got suspended for 2 full weeks when it came out he was one of the main people who'd created and distributed them. His football scholarship offers started getting withdrawn. Turns out colleges don't like students who create explicit images of minors, even AI-generated ones. Riley slowly started healing. She still had incredibly hard days, still dealt with judgment from some people, but she also had real support now. Other survivors who truly understood, teachers who believed her, even some parents who apologized for not seeing the truth sooner. She started talking about college again, about eventually becoming a social worker to help other girls like her, like all of us. The legal process was painfully slow. There were endless hearings and delays and motions. Harrison's expensive lawyer tried every possible trick to get the charges reduced or dismissed entirely, but the evidence was simply too strong. Too many victims, too much documentation, too clear a pattern. Eventually, he took a plea deal. 22 years in prison, registry as a sex offender for life, never allowed to teach again or be around minors. It wasn't nearly enough for what he'd done to so many girls over so many years, but it was something. Justice of a sort. The school district made sweeping changes, new policies about student-teacher interactions, mandatory reporting training that actually meant something, anonymous tip lines that went to outside investigators instead of internal administration. They couldn't undo the damage that had been done, but they could try to prevent it from happening again. Riley graduated with honors despite absolutely everything she'd been through. Walked across that stage with her baby in the audience and her head held incredibly high. I still have 2 years of high school left, but they're different now. Better. The culture has shifted. People are more aware, more careful, more willing to speak up. Mrs. Chen became our unofficial mentor. She helped Riley with college applications, helped me figure out what I wanted to do with my future. She said we'd shown more courage than most adults she knew in her entire life, that we'd changed things, probably saved lives. I didn't know about that. We just did what felt right, what absolutely had to be done. Harrison's sentence made national news. They didn't name victims in the coverage, but everyone in town knew. Riley gave one interview with her voice disguised and face hidden. She said she hoped other girls would speak up, that they'd be believed, that the adults meant to protect them would actually protect them. And she said she was healing and moving forward, that her baby would grow up in a better, safer world because people had finally listened. That's the whole story. It was messy and painful and complicated. Nothing like the dramatic revelations you see on television. Just 2 teenage girls who refused to let a predator keep hurting people, who found their voices when everyone tried to silence them, who learned that sometimes doing the right thing means everything gets worse before it eventually gets better. But it does get better. Riley's in college now, thriving. I'm applying next year, thinking seriously about criminal justice or social work, maybe both. Those AI photos, the people who created and distributed them got more than school punishment. Creating and distributing explicit images of minors, even AI-generated ones, is a serious federal crime. They're all doing community service and probation. Their college dreams are completely destroyed. Harrison's in prison where he belongs. Matthews is gone. The school is safer now. Not perfect, but significantly better. And Riley? She's still the strongest person I've ever known. Still kind and helpful to others. Still refusing to let what happened completely define her entire life. She says her baby saved her life and gave her a reason to fight back. But I think she saved herself. And maybe saved a lot of other girls too. That's everything. Thanks for reading. If you're going through something similar, please speak up. Find someone who believes you. Don't give up. It gets better. I promise.